Mike had worked hard for his dream home. A cozy house with a spacious backyard, free from the ridiculous rules of an HOA. Unlike most of his neighbors, he had opted out of joining the HOA when he bought the place. He thought that meant they'd leave him alone. He was wrong. The trouble started when Karen, the HOA president, came knocking. Dressed in her usual power walking gear, clipboard in hand, she barely bothered with pleasantries. "We need to talk about your backyard," she said, peering over his fence like she owned the place. Mike raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "It's meant to be a community green space," she declared, as if it were a known fact. The previous owner understood that. "It's always been a public park for the neighborhood." Mike stared at her, then looked back at his yard, his private property, fully fenced, maintained with his time and money. "That's funny," he said, "because my deed says it belongs to me." Karen's smile faltered. "Technically, yes. But it's always been treated as an open space. Kids play there. Families picnic. It's tradition." "Tradition doesn't override property law," Mike replied, already feeling the irritation creeping in. Karen didn't care. "I'm notifying you that we'll be adding it to the HOA's community maintenance plan. We expect you to keep it accessible at all times." Mike crossed his arms. "Not happening." Karen's expression hardened. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. If you refuse, I'll have to issue fines for blocking community access." Mike almost laughed. "I'm not in your HOA. You can't fine me." Karen's nostrils flared. She stormed off, muttering about selfish homeowners. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. A few days later, his backyard wasn't so private anymore. Kids started climbing his fence, running across his lawn like it was a playground. Parents set up picnics on his grass. A couple even installed a soccer net. Mike confronted them, but they smugly pointed toward Karen's house. "She said it's a community park," one woman said, barely looking up from her phone. "You can't just hog it." Mike was livid. He asked them to leave, but they ignored him. Then came the petty revenge. Someone cut a hole in his fence. The next morning, his lawn was trashed with litter. When he complained, Karen smiled sweetly. "That's just the cost of having a park," she said. "Maybe you should clean up after your guests." Mike clenched his jaw. Karen wanted a park? Fine. He'd give her a park she'd never forget. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. If she couldn't force Mike to comply, she'd find another way to get what she wanted. That meant trying to fight back. But just like everything else she did, it backfired spectacularly. Her first attempt was a neighborhood cleanup day. She rallied the HOA members, convinced them that together, they could restore the park to its former glory. Armed with shovels, rakes, and a ridiculous sense of entitlement, they marched into Mike's backyard, ready to reclaim their precious green space. Within minutes, they regretted everything. The first step onto the yard was a disaster. Shoes sank deep into the mud. Every step pulled them further in. One man lost a sneaker entirely and had to hobble back to solid ground, covered in thick brown sludge. The mosquitoes were relentless. They swarmed anyone who stood still for more than a second, biting exposed skin until the volunteers looked like they had a rash. Then, the real chaos started. Someone spotted a snake, just a harmless water snake, but that didn't matter. Within seconds, the cleanup crew was in full panic mode. People screamed, shoved each other out of the way, and tripped over themselves trying to escape the so-called park. Karen, of course, refused to give up. She stood on the edge of the yard, barking orders at the retreating HOA members. "Get back in there. We have to fix this." No one listened. They were done. Defeated, Karen turned to her next move: legal threats. She filed a complaint with the city, claiming Mike had destroyed community land and created a health hazard. An inspector came out, clipboard in hand, ready to shut Mike down. But instead of finding violations, the inspector was impressed. "This is actually a fantastic natural wetland," he told Karen, glancing around at the flourishing reeds and cattails. "You're lucky to have it." Karen's mouth dropped open. "Lucky?" "Absolutely," the inspector continued. "These ecosystems support biodiversity. Honestly, I'd recommend leaving it as is. Might even qualify for environmental funding. Mike had to hold back a grin as Karen turned an alarming shade of purple. The final straw came when the HOA held a meeting demanding action. Karen pushed for aggressive legal measures, insisting they had to force Mike to restore the lawn. But after the swamp fiasco, the other members had lost patience. We can't find him. He's not even in the HOA. He's not breaking any laws. We just made fools of ourselves trying to clean it up. For the first time, Karen found herself outnumbered. The people who once blindly followed her were now turning against her. Then came the ultimate humiliation. Instead of punishing Mike, the HOA board fined Karen for unauthorized activity on private property. Mike didn't even have to say anything. The look on her face was victory enough.